The Silent Traitor. It was the year 1857, during the War of Independence. In an old fort of Lahore, British soldiers were stationed. Among them was a young soldier named Edward Henry. Outwardly, he was a stern officer, but inside he was soft-hearted and deeply emotional. He was obsessed with writing in his diary. Every night, he would lock away the horrors of war, the cruelty and the suffering of prisoners into words. One day, he came across a captive girl named Fatima. Tears glistened in her eyes, and defiance shone on her face. She had been imprisoned for fighting for her brother's freedom. For the first time, Edward felt his heart beat in chains. Secretly, he began giving her water and food. Slowly, silent conversations grew between them. They didn't share a language, but their eyes translated everything. In his diary, Edward wrote, "This girl is not an enemy. She is light. Perhaps she is my salvation." But fate had other plans. One night, Fatima decided to escape. Edward risked his life to show her the way. The gates opened. As she stepped outside, Fatima turned back. Edward was smiling, as if he had just freed his own soul. But the next morning, a shocking truth was revealed to the British Army. The secret passage Fatima used was designed by Edward himself. Yet he had told no one else about it. He was declared a traitor and arrested. In court, when asked, "Why did you betray your own country?" Edward gave only one reply: "I did not betray my nation. I was betrayed by a heart that fell in love with the enemy." He was executed by a firing squad. But his diary's last words still shake the soul. When love breaks through borders, the greatest betrayal is not of a man, it is of history itself. The Lahore fort had now turned into a symbol of desolation. The roar of cannons had faded, yet the scent of gunpowder still lingered in the air. Months had passed since Edward's death, but his diary had remained hidden, untouched. Fatima, who had once again joined the freedom struggle, returned to the abandoned fort one night. The walls were silent, yet her heart felt a strange pull. She kept wondering, the man who risked his life to save her, what truly lived inside his heart? She wandered into an old chamber of the fort. The floor was still stained with dirt and dried blood. Suddenly, her eyes fell upon a wooden chest. Inside it lay an old diary, its pages stained with dried blood, as though written with ink of pain. With trembling hands, Fatima opened it and began to read. The very first page shook her soul. Fatima, perhaps you will never read these words, perhaps you will. I saved you, but the truth is, I gave myself into your captivity. Your prison walls were not of stone, they were your eyes. I know my country will call me a traitor, but who can silence the heart? As she turned page after page, tears streamed down her face. She realized Edward's betrayal was not to his country, it was to his own love. Again and again he had written, "Love is my crime, and this crime will never be forgiven." But then she came upon a page that shattered her world. It read, "Fatima, I cannot die without telling you the truth. That night when I set you free, one of your own companions struck a deal with me. He promised that if I showed you the way out, he would save the other prisoners. But instead, he betrayed us all. He handed them over to the British. The bullet that ended my life came from British guns, but the real betrayal came from your own." Fatima's hands trembled as she read. If this was true, then the real traitor was not Edward, but one of her own people, the very person she had trusted the most. On the final page, Edward had written, "I wanted you to know the truth. You may call me an enemy, you may call me love. But remember this, the most dangerous betrayal is always the one that comes from within." Clutching the diary to her chest, Fatima stepped out of the ruined walls of the fort. Her eyes no longer held tears alone. They carried a vow to uncover the real traitor. As the night's silence embraced her, only one sentence trembled on her lips. "Edward, you were never the traitor. The true traitor is hidden among us." Here, the story takes a new turn. The betrayal is no longer limited to Edward. The real traitor turns out to be someone from Fatima's own people. The tragedy and emotions deepen, opening the way for the next chapter. With the darkness of night began a new journey. When Fatima stepped out of the fort, there was no fear left in her eyes, only fire. Edward's diary had both wounded her heart and given her a new purpose. Her battle was no longer only against the British, it was also against the dagger hidden among her own people, the one who had struck from behind. Days passed. Fatima secretly began observing her comrades. Men she had fought alongside for years now seemed to wear masks of loyalty. But behind some of those masks, cracks were visible. One night, when the leaders of the resistance gathered in secret, Fatima placed Edward's diary before them. A heavy silence filled the room. Every gaze was fixed on her, as if she were about to unseal a forbidden truth. She read aloud, "The true traitor is the one who sold his own people into British hands." At once, the color drained from the face of an old comrade, Kamal Khan. His eyes trembled, sweat dripping down his forehead. Fatima's voice cut through the silence. "Kamal Khan, that night when the prisoners were promised freedom, it was you who went to Edward, wasn't it?" Kamal Khan lowered his gaze. The room froze in stillness, like the breath of death itself. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, it was me. But you don't know, I was forced. The British had taken my family hostage. If I hadn't given the prisoners to them, they would have destroyed everything I loved." Fire blazed in Fatima's eyes. "Even betrayal done under compulsion remains betrayal, Kamal Khan. You didn't just hand our comrades to their deaths, you condemned a man who, though called our enemy, proved himself more loyal than us all." Shame and fear carved deep lines into Kamal Khan's face. The others closed in around him, but Fatima raised her hand to stop them. "No, do not punish him now. Time will give him his justice. But from this day forward, he has no place among us." Lifting Edward's diary high, she declared, "Edward was called a traitor by the world, but in truth, he was the most loyal to us. He gave his life so that we could live, and today, this truth is our strength." After that night, a new spirit ran through the resistance. Edward's name was no longer remembered as an enemy's. It became a symbol of sacrifice, of love, of unexpected loyalty. Fatima fought on every front, but her heart always carried an empty space, the memory of that final smile Edward gave her. Years later, when the British finally left India, Fatima was an old woman. She would often sit beneath a tree, reading Edward's diary again and again. Tears would fall, but in her heart there was peace. The truth had at last been revealed. On her lips until her final breath were the same words, "Edward, you were never the traitor. The true traitors were the ones hidden among us, and history will never forget you." In this final chapter, Fatima exposes the true traitor within her own people. Edward, once condemned, is remembered instead as a symbol of sacrifice and love. The betrayal of one of their own becomes a scar in history, while Edward's name transforms into a legend. Time turned its wheel. The sun of freedom had finally risen after the British departure. People shouted slogans of joy, flags were raised, and the forts that once stood as symbols of tyranny now became monuments of independence. Yet within Fatima's heart a hollow space remained. Edward's sacrifice and that final smile she could never forget. One day, during the celebrations of freedom, Fatima was asked to collect old records and writings from the fort to preserve them for the new generation. As she entered a broken chamber of the fort, she discovered an old chest. Inside it were papers, British military reports, court documents, and a letter. The letter read, "To the Governor. This soldier, Edward Henry, has been executed for treason. However, it must be recorded that his final words did not speak of hatred for his country, but of love for an Indian woman. His death may silence his body, but I fear his story will live beyond our control." Tears streamed down Fatima's face as she read those lines. Edward's story was no longer only her memory. Even the British had admitted he was no ordinary traitor. He was a man history could never erase. Fatima decided to place Edward's diary and the letter in a small shrine. The shrine bore no grand inscriptions, no flag, only a single line engraved. "Here rests the man the world called a traitor, but love proved him loyal." Years passed. People came, prayed, and often asked who he was. Fatima would simply smile and reply, "He was the enemy, but far truer than many of our own." At last, the day came for Fatima herself to leave this world. She sat beneath the same tree where she often read Edward's diary. The worn pages trembled in her hands, and on her lips were the same words she had carried for years. "Edward, you were never the traitor. The true traitors were the ones hidden among us." She closed her eyes, her breath faded, but peace filled her heart. The kind of peace that only comes to those who know the truth. Final message. The story had reached its end. This was not just Edward and Fatima's tale, it was history's reminder of betrayal. The enemy is often visible, but the deepest wounds always come from within. Edward's memory was no longer a tale, but a symbol that sometimes the truest loyalty comes from the one we once called an enemy. The end.